Contested ground, exposing the strategies and tactics of grey zone warfare as actors compete for power and influence below the threshold of armed conflict.
G'day everybody, Steve Kuper at Defence Connect. I hope you are well and welcome to a very special episode of our Contested Ground podcast series. This will be our first video Contested Ground podcast, so that's exciting. You will no doubt have seen us doing video podcasts for the broader Defence Connect network. And joining me in the studio today is a friend of mine, Dave Grosvenor, and a new friend of mine, Steve Hayes. Gentlemen, how are you?
Great, thanks, and great to be here. Thanks for hosting.
Not a problem.
Yeah,
thank you,
Steve, for having us.
And our subject today is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is reindustrialisation and industrial resilience within the Australian context. And we constantly told Australia can't compete on cost and wages and all manners of things. I don't necessarily see that as the case anymore with the advent of automation and dark factories, is the case in the Chinese example. Do you think we can compete, guys?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about advanced manufacturing, I think we can, and we can build that industrial base. If we're talking about building AI chipsets, clearly not. So we've got to look at where we have some strengths and where we can grow some sovereign capability. But I think the first question is, where are we lacking in national resilience? What do our supply chains look like? Have we done a proper audit on what the industrial capability is in this country? And the simple answer to that, in my view, is no.
And that's a very big bugbear for you, Dave. You have a army logistician's background.
Navy.
Close enough. There's the old saying that logistics wins wars, and that's never been more true. We're seeing that play out in Ukraine at the moment. We were talking about the Ukrainian conflict off air, and it's very much the case in the Middle East. I heard some shocking statistics the other day that for the US to replenish all of its missile stocks used during the current conflict in the Middle East, it'll take them between 8 and 12 years.
Wow. Well, I think, yes, Steve, the importance of the supply chain can't be overstated. And I think, we've had the RAND, wargaming, we've had the, a PM&C audit or review of our supply chain resilience, and we don't need any more reviews to instruct us that we need to be focusing on, making sure that our supply chain is resilient. And, to your point, Steve, yes, we can compete, but whether we can or can't is immaterial, because we may have to focus on developing a capability to sustain us in the event that we are, heaven forbid, blockaded, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Well, Dave, you're completely right, and that's why we need an audit. So what are the things that we can safely continue to receive through a supply chain, through our allies? Certainly we're not going to build ship gearboxes, for example, and we should be able to continue to get those supplies internationally. But if we look at simple things that came unstuck during COVID, we look at medical face masks. And I talk about social amnesia in this country.
Oh, yeah.
As soon as it's over, and we've forgotten about it. I'd be interested to know how many face masks are still being produced in this country, and I suspect the answer is no. So as soon as the problem's gone...
What about hand sanitizer? How much hand sanitizer is being produced?
Exactly. I like the gin factory, actually.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Their whiskey's not bad, actually, Archie Rose. It's a very good drop.
But look, I think we need to think about where, to Dave's point, the critical issues are, where the critical supply needs are, and invest and be prepared to pay over the odds for them. Why aren't we continuing to manufacture face masks? There's a very simple example in this country.
It's very interesting. I was listening to a podcast breakdown of, and this I'll thread this all back to the fallout from the Makerfield by-election in the UK. We know that Sir Keir Starmer's left. and he is kind of cut from the ilk of Tony Blair and the New Labour movement from the 1990s, and wait and see what happens as to who replaces him. But the most likely candidate is Andy Burnham, who is more from the north, the industrial north, and how he can effectively neuter the rise and combat the rise of the likes of Reform and Restore, in that there's no more, the economic argument doesn't hold up as much anymore when it comes to industries that are critical to national security, national sovereignty, and resilience. And they were using the examples of iron, shipbuilding, coal, a lot of the industries that were targeted in that liberalisation period under the Thatcher, and then who succeeded Margaret Thatcher. The name is
not Gordon Brown.
Not Gordon. John Major. John Major, thank you. Yeah, through that period of hyper-liberalisation that we saw here take place probably beginning in 1990 and then really ramp up after 96. And we're starting to see those questions play out here as to what we need to be considered a sovereign nation when push comes to shove. So, Steve, from your point of view, what do we need to do given that, as Aspie points out, we run on stored time?
Well, I just think about the time I spent 11 hours flying up and down the Malacca Straits, and it doesn't take much to think about how easily we could be coerced in this country and our sea lines of communication shut down. So it is a serious issue. But I don't think we know the answer to where we need to invest. Now, PM&C put out a good report post-COVID, but that's not enough. And there isn't independent advice on when we need to be investing in sovereign capability in the country. So I think step one is, what do we need to invest in the country? And that we'll only know that if we do a proper analysis and of the industrial base in the country. Now, along came AdBlue. Who'd have thought? We see the Strait of Hormuz shut, and all of a sudden we've got fuel crisis. To be fair, the Labor government did a reasonable job in getting us through this current period. But if that had gone on and become worse for any reason, we could have been in a very parlous state. We talk about urea and fertiliser. Little known fact, I suspect, that there's a massive $1 billion urea plant being built in Karratha in Western Australia that will produce 2.3 million tonnes of urea each year to support the agricultural needs in this country. Now, that's important. That's an example of something that's been done well. That was funded through the Northern reduced loans from the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility. West Australian government put $50 million into the infrastructure around it, and they're taking gas off Woodside. An example of analysing something, private sector getting in and delivering it. What are all the other things that we need to be worried about? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody does. So we do need an audit.
Is it a matter of going back to basics? I remember from Econ 101 that at a most basic level, any nation, in order to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, is you need, at least in the old industrial concept, is iron, coal, and oil.
Well, if we remember when I studied economics 101, as you said, we used to talk about T, C, F and C, textiles, clothing, footwear and cars. And of course, like most Western democracies, Australia's been drinking the free trade Kool-Aid for so long that we've actually deindustrialised to the point where we could not, unlike the late 1930s, the chairman of BHP was able to get all other captains of industry together and form the Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation with, of course, the support of the federal government. And they flew over to the United States and got some designs of planes and came back, and they started to manufacture planes in Australia. We were still manufacturing planes in Australia under licence, Spitfires, Mustangs, if memory serves me correctly, until the end of World War II. I think we had the sixth largest air force in the world at the end of... Now, we couldn't do that now because we've, as I said, deindustrialised. So as Steve said, the first step's an audit to to have greater minds than ours to determine what it is that we do need. And then, and economics again, the theory of second best, where our market's imperfect in Australia. So we need, or the government needs to intervene in the market to ensure that the industries that we need are there. And if the government determines, Steve, that we do need, gearboxes and indeed engines, if that's what we need to do to survive a blockade, then that's where we need to invest. And I mean, it would need federal government investment because it's an imperfect market.
Agreed. And, if I think a useful framework is some work we've been doing recently on national security, and people automatically lean, I think, in defence and intelligence. Well, actually, national security is about much more than that. If I think about perhaps 7 pillars, Pillar 1 might be defence and border security. Pillar 7 is actually social cohesion. In the middle of it, there's energy and a whole range of other things like technology. 100%. So that's a useful framework in which to think about an audit, I think.
Absolutely. And, again, just a simple thing like the availability of oil, like diesel, gas, petrol, and aviation turbine fuel. We only make 20% of what we consume. So, if we don't store, the 90 days onshore, then we are people. This would be like a wake-up call to the average citizen.
Rationing comes at us very quickly.
Rationing would be immediate, and it would be logistics companies get all the diesel, doctors, nurses, police. They get to use petrol, and the average citizen the car would be parked in the garage indefinitely.
But how do we get over the problem of national amnesia? Because as soon as something's over, it's over. I can guarantee you now that the Strait of Hormuz is open, everyone will have forgotten about the fuel threat.
Well, maybe sometimes I always believe that things happen for a reason. And looks, maybe we need to crash before people realise that there's a problem. It's a bit like alcoholism. You've got to admit you've got a problem before you can cure it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not a bad analogy. And it is, and I think it comes back to the kind of mythologizing of the lucky country moniker that we have given ourselves, that we've really embraced.
Should be right, mate.
Yeah, which is I cannot reinforce this enough. The whole lucky country idea was meant as a term of derision, and it was never meant as a term of endearment. And I think Donald Horne would be looking back at what Australia has become now and go, it wasn't meant as a form of advice, guys. It was meant as a kind of break glass moment. You have to pinch the Robert Frost Year 12 English example. You've got two roads diverging in a wood, and we're going down the path that's going to lead us to quite a potentially disastrous predicament that opens a whole host of problems for Australia should, irregardless of whether Australia intervenes or joins any intervention in securing Taiwan, if there is a Taiwan conflagration, we don't even have to be involved. There's the flow-on effects that will impact Australia are going to be seismic.
So, I was talking to an economist the other day, and he said it'll be a decadal economic impact to the country if something like that goes down. So let's hope it doesn't. It doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare. And I think, beyond an audit, we should be looking at the industrial base, particularly from a defence capability or a dual-use capability as well. And so the question I would ask is, what does an industrial step-up look like? What should we be preparing industry to do to support the nation in times of turmoil? And maybe it's government supports Factory A to have double the floor space and capability to produce 2x of what it currently produces in case it needs to.
Similar to what FDR did under the New Deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, we're not the Soviet Union. We don't have to nationalise every industry. I mean, you can under the Defence Act if you had to, by the way. But we rely on the private sector. It's a capitalist society. But it does though? Well, when you think that 50% of the people are either directly or indirectly employed by a government, then we probably are not so much capitalist economy anymore. But but I think it's got to be led by the government, But industry will invest if they see the certainty. If the government says, for example, after an audit, here is a plan and we are going to invest in these industries and we're going to create opportunity zones, strategic or sovereign industry opportunity zones. And they're like, for example, Whyalla and, Townsville.
Newcastle, Port
Yeah,
Kembla.
Newcastle, these places. And they could, government can use every lever at their disposal: tax holidays, greenfields, workplace relations, providing the infrastructure, co-investment. That's a big one, co-investment,
Well,
and the private sector will step up.
I agree with you, and Dave, and I think we also need to be careful that we think about the private sector being SMEs and medium enterprises, not internationally ABN badged companies. We need to have genuine sovereign capability in the country.
Yeah.
My question to all of this is, and it on paper it sounds great, but Australia of the 1930s, even Australia of the 1950s and 1960s, was blessed with captains of industry. Do we have them anymore? Because I can't see them.
Well, I'm sure we do. But the captains of the so-called captains of industry now are running banks rather than running
or resource companies.
Well, I see both of those points of view, and I would argue that they aren't captains of industry. I would argue that they are captains of special interest.
Yes.
Or captains of service industry. And that's what we do here now. If you look at our GDP, 95% of it is coming from things like finance, insurance, education. The NDIS, well, that's a fun one. That's a fun fact. Next year, it's going to exceed the budget for the NDIS, assuming that the government does not implement any changes, will exceed the defence budget. Or maybe if it's not next year, it's the year after. And the NDIS was supposed to only be about $30 billion a year, and it's approaching 50 a year. And remember, Medicare is only 30 odd. So the NDIS budget for this year is larger than the Medicare budget for the entire nation. So it's extraordinary. But I only mention that to say that there is headroom for a federal government so inclined to take this matter seriously, bring the nation on the journey with them, conduct the audit as a first step, then come up with the plan, and bring the public, bring an apathetic electorate on the journey with them to address this, And industry, as I said, you put the money in the forward estimates, that's 4 years, and unlike the green dream, of having green electricity and all that sort of stuff, where industry doesn't know, God, this might all change in a couple of years if there's a change of government. We put this in the forward estimates that both parties can commit to this, and and then if you build it,
okay, and
they will come.
I'll share my thoughts on the federal government issue, but I'll also talk about the second and third tier of government too, because they have a role in this. If I look at an example of something has been run really well, an engagement across country, across federal government, it would have to be the Defence Workforce and Skills Task Force for South Australia. Now, that was a joint effort between the Deputy Prime Minister and the Premier of South Australia. It worked because it was run through PM&C at a federal level and with multiple agencies involved. There's no way in the world an individual agency like the Department of Industry, for example, could pick up the running on something like this. It's a multi-sectoral issue and henceforth a multi-agency issue. Yeah. The only agency I really think that has the imprimatur and the capacity to capability to actually direct that's probably PM&C, with someone like Defence being a lead on it. Yeah. But we can't forget the state government and local government's role in these things as well. If we look at specific needs at a state level, then maybe we ought to be looking at payroll tax concessions for those special industries. If we look at local government, I come from the Shoalhaven, and they're building, for example, industrial parks, but they're not putting enough power in there to actually
The
run.
old chestnut.
To actually run a decent factory. So there are, responsibilities and opportunities at all three levels of government.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think that there's a word there that you used, Steve, and that is opportunities. Part of the problem that we, and I think this comes back to the she'll be right, lucky country, is we tend to put things into a too hard basket because, oh, don't worry, she'll be right.
Mm.
And part of me wonders if there's, I'm trying not to be too overtly political about this, but I don't think it's remiss of me to say, or out of line for me to say, that both sides of politics have really dropped the ball. And I would say that it's not just something that's happened in the last 5 or 6 or even 10 years. It's been something that's been a systemic issue that has really built up over the past probably 30 years.
Absolutely, Steve. It's the peace dividend from Pax Americana, Pax Americana.
And
Well, I think there's more than that. I think it's the lack of long-term strategic vision and the ability to stay the course. Now, you might want to talk about China, but they've got a 10-year plan, a 25-year plan, the same as Singapore, and they actually drive towards that. Our short-term nature of government here doesn't seem to provide that same opportunity for strategic planning.
Well, there's no reason why it can't. I mean,
well, only if there's bipartisan support. Absolutely
true. And well, on the subject of national security, I mean, the parties should, be seeking to reach agreement on this in the national interest. I know the national interest is thrown around all the time.
It's a vague
term. I agree, Dave. I think in saying that, we need to emphasise to everybody that national security is not just about defence and border security.
Yeah.
It's about technology, it's about energy, it's about social cohesion. It's all those other things as well.
Here's the one that often gets slept on is, I'm a dad. You're both dads.
Yep.
A lot of young Australians don't see any opportunity. They don't see our generation as having the same opportunity that, I'm not pointing fingers here, but I'm pointing fingers, that your generation's had in terms of economic outcomes, in terms of lifestyle outcomes, in terms of all of these things, because cost of living's going up, housing's going up, our ability to have a family is diminished. Now, there are outliers. I'm probably an outlier, but like my brother and sister, who are both now in their 30s, don't have the same opportunity to settle down and have a family and build a life because of the way in which the system is now constructed. And it's not uniquely an Australian problem. It's a problem that's writ large across the West. So how do we do that? And the opportunity to do that through reindustrialisation and industrial sovereignty is something that we can do, and it goes to narrative, but it's also about getting people to understand that the industrial jobs of today are not the dumb and dirty jobs of the 1980s and the 1970s and further back. It's a lot of high tech.
Well, Steve, John Howard used to famously say that people get mugged by reality, and I think our civilization's just about to be mugged by the reality of artificial intelligence. So I think thankfully, I'm not somebody who's just graduated from university trying to start out my career, because you'd be competing with AI now to become a journalist, to be...
Oh, don't swear at me, Dave. I'm not a journalist.
To be a
hologram.
reporter, to be a script writer. For example, the list of professions that are going to be profoundly impacted by artificial intelligence is a very long list. And I think if the federal government has the wisdom and foresight to recognise that we need to change, we need to actually change move the needle and, look at this this is going to be a seismic shift in the way we as a civilization on Earth exist. And I think the only opportunities that are, for growth in jobs in the future will be in the real jobs, like the ones we used to do.
It'll be the
when
physical.
we were manufacturing things and adding value in that process. Now I know it's a different world now when we used to manufacture automobiles after World War II. We can't compete. And I mean, I don't think we need to manufacture automobiles, to be honest, anymore, because they're global cars and you're competing, labour costs. So you can't compete with Thailand and Mexico and South Africa, for example. But, I think if we do implement, a plan to re-industrialise, even to the extent that it's the minimum viable product, to use a sort of a tech term, there will be opportunities for people to, learn trades. And I'm really pleased actually that both political parties in Australia have committed to shipbuilding. I think that's a positive, and what's happening to grow Osborne over in Western Australia, Osborne, in South Australia.
And Henderson.
Henderson, I beg your pardon, in Western Australia. I think that the government is effectively co-investing in that, which is, again, a great example of what can happen when the government and both political parties, are committed to the idea. And I think we just build on that success and look at what's happening with Boeing. The Ghost Bat, for example. I think the government, again, we need to start co-investing in these things where. And we look at the the EU unmanned underwater.
Ghost Shark.
Yeah, the Ghost Shark,
Shark.
for example,
And
Anduril and that sort of thing.
Look, I think you're right. There's great opportunity, and I've had the privilege of being through both shipyards recently, and what's happening there is fabulous, and the opportunities for young and middle-aged people to get into careers, and they've been well supported to do so, I have to add. Even down at the SME level, I've watched a small company in my area, SMETech, armoured vehicle supply chain, growing over the last 3 or 4 years with government support. We have people there with 3-axis milling machine and having to program that. So they're really exciting, interesting jobs for people straight out of school going into industrial type jobs.
And we're sort of reminiscing over the halcyon days when Australia could make things, but Australia's actually still there's still an entrepreneurial sort of flair within Australia.
We'll see
and
how
there
long
are these,
that lasts.
There are these SMEs,
current predicament.
but there are these SMEs in Australia, like the one you just mentioned, Steve, that are making things, and of course you've got the 3D printing and all that sort of thing, but if you do conduct an audit, then you identify these niche industries, and people can, government can say, hey, we do need to, like people with milling machines and CNC lathes and things like, focus on developing our sovereign ability. We might start, and if we do need to manufacture gearboxes and engines, well, we'll find the organisations that can do that.
I think there's I don't disagree in principle. One of the things that I think we don't do very well, and it starts at the engineering and the design level, is designing for scalability. All too often, you both float around in the defence industry space, and one thing that I constantly hear is, particularly from the larger organisations, I'm thinking of like your BAEs and your Lockheed Thales and things like that, is we find these great Australian companies who are doing something that is just so world-leading, that is so ahead of the curve. We say, right, we want to bring you into our supply chain. By the way, we need you to make 5,000 or we need you to make 50,000. And these companies then go, oh, shit. And that's genuinely what I've heard them say. Oh, shit. Like, we don't have the ability to scale that because we've never actually gone into the in-depth process of designing the scalability from the production aspect. So it's not just about identifying the industries that we can compete in. It's about helping them identify the scalability of their market offering.
And that's exactly the sort of thing that SMETech's going through, and it's done very, very well. It's actually, look, how do you scale to support? And it is a journey. You actually, you need support to be able to look at how you are able to deliver those things without choking. And I still think there's long, dark nights of the soul for people like that actually enter that journey, and they show a lot of courage to actually go there. And this is where I think government support and focus to develop small and medium enterprises is critical for the future of the nation.
Yeah.
And one thing you'll have heard me say this: success leaves clues.
Yeah.
It's a favourite saying of mine. There's a lot of examples around the world that we can draw on that have been very successful, and some of the notes that you sent over. One of the standout examples is Korea. I actually did my master's thesis on Korea's industrialization process post Korean War, and one of the things that in Australia we get bogged down in is that we have to, whenever the concept or the phrase industrialization gets brought into, or manufacturing gets brought into the conversation, people automatically go to the lowest common denominator.
Well, everybody automatically thinks of the automobile industry, you know.
I don't even find it at that. I find it goes to textiles and
IKEA,
IKEA,
as we said before,
Kmart,
TCF and C. Well,
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able, if you're manufacturing in Australia now, you wouldn't be able to go down to, you know, a Kmart and buy the $2 T-shirt. And let's be perfectly honest, that's why there are no mills of any note anywhere in Australia anymore. That's why we don't have a textile, clothing, footwear or car industry anymore. But having said that, we do manufacture our own defence uniforms, for example. Again, another industry that's sponsored by defence for obvious reasons. You know, it'd be crazy if we were entirely reliant on uniforms coming from overseas. So we still do have some textile. We still make R.M. Williams boots, for example. We still make clothes. We don't make automobiles, but we probably could, but they wouldn't be on a mass production line anymore. And again, look, you know, I'm quite optimistic about Australia's ability to recover from this malaise. I think we've lost our way. I think, and you're right, it started in the 90s, and it was, I think, in part associated with the peace dividend. And we just thought, hey, you know, look, and you know, people in organisations are incentivised to save organisations money. I mean, I've spent my career in buying things and logistics, and of course, we always, you know, if you're working for Woolies or you know Coles, you know, if you can find. We don't even make paper bags anymore. I looked at the one, you know, made in Vietnam, or the Woolies ones are made in China or something.
I will say, like, just as an anecdotal piece of evidence, when we moved house, my wife found an Australian-made and designed dryer.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic.
Oh, really?
It is unbelievable.
Yeah, well, look, you know, when you think... I think my family was probably one of the last households to buy a refrigerator manufactured in Orange by, you know, Westinghouse. You know,
Great wine country, by the way.
You know, and that was, but again, look, we may not need to make paper bags for Woolies. The audit might say, who cares where they come from, you know. And we may not need to manufacture refrigerators. But we, you know, again, these are decisions that obviously the three of us aren't going to be making, but greater minds than ours need to consider what things we must make in order to, you know, sustain our supply chain. And I mean, we don't even make, for example, the chemicals to purify our water system. I think they come from Canada.
Well, we don't even make paracetamol.
Oh, we do. We still do. But again, 95% of what we consume is coming from offshore.
Yeah.
You know, it's coming from India, it's coming from China, or it's coming from Malaysia or something like that. You know, but we used to like I look at the backs of every you know, container in a supermarket to the enduring annoyance of my wife to look up from where everything's coming. Now, increasingly, since we entered into all these free trade agreements with all these organisations, we're being flooded. Who would have ever thought, for example, that juice, like tomato juice or orange juice, is made from imported tomatoes or imported oranges? It's pathetic, isn't it? But it's true.
Yeah. If an economist is out there, and I would invite them, please tell me how the economics of transporting oranges from California.
Well, it comes as juice. Remember, it doesn't come as an orange.
How is it more? How is it economically more cost effective to import? But hey, even oranges from Woolies or Coles or Aldi. Sometimes they're Spain or
mostly. Thankfully, most of the produce in our retailers comes from Australia, but that's where it ends. I mean, once you start looking at tinned food, for example, like Heinz no longer manufactures soup, for example, in Australia. It's manufactured in New Zealand.
Oh, that's all right.
Campbell's is probably the only. I'm not trying to advocate for any particular.
Oh, and SPC, by the way.
SPC. Well, that was a great success story. It was bought out, remember, from the Coca-Cola. It was an employee buyout of the Coke from Coke, and it's thriving. But again, I guess these are just examples of how organisations are clinging on by their fingernails, and they're the only supplier. So now we're talking about the only manufacturers of particular products.
But sorry to cut you off, Steve. I'll give you an example of that. Like if you go to Costco, frozen blueberries imported from California.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they have packs of grass-fed beef that's Australian, grass-fed, grass-finished beef.
And some of the best Christmas hams you'll buy anywhere, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
They do nice sandwich plates.
They do actually, yeah. So there's that question there of how is it economically viable? Now there's the whole thing about scales of value and things like that. But also I'm not sure if you saw the family box of Tim Tams that here is $43. But
I saw it in Costco the other day.
Yeah, $43 here, but in America it's $13. So it's like...
So I just want to step away from the economics for a moment, though. If we're serious about sovereign capability, it doesn't really matter what we pay for particular things. Now, I also want to go back to your 5,000 example. If Company A gets an order for 5,000 and actually steps up to be able to make that and actually creates the industrial capability, we need to make sure that we sustain that industrial capability as well.
The shipbuilding valley of death.
Yeah, so we want to avoid that boom and bust, the valley of death. So it's not just about creating those industries, it's about sustaining those industries as well.
Well, the Japanese model of shipbuilding and submarine building is probably the world's best, I would dare say, in terms of we build a design and halfway we actually build for what we need, not an arbitrary number or replacing like for like. Yes, guess what? DSR, national defence strategies, compare them to the forces that we outlined and identified as a need in the 1987 Defence White Paper. It's all the same.
Yeah.
We actually build for what we need, and halfway through the design process, throughout the build process, they start designing the follow-on. And it's not a clean sheet design always. It's a evolution.
Yeah. And iterative
design process. Yeah. So by the end of the time boat one or ship one slides down the shipyard, they're already building boat one or ship one of the new class.
But look, if I could bring you back to something, a direction that you were heading in before about planning. Look, we don't fail to plan. We don't plan to fail. We merely fail to plan. And I think Steve mentioned it earlier that countries like the Republic of Korea, made a deliberate plan to support 5 chai bowls. They were. Look how huge they are now, like Hyundai, LG, Samsung, etc. And, of course, their defence industry is, enormous. They're, exporters, over the world. But it was the planning that set that up. See, we don't have a plan. So we are planning for 4 years in the forward estimates of a federal budget. And beyond that, there is no planning. We have a 3-year electoral cycle. So we're not going to change that sort of easily, but we do need to have a long-term plan. And the Korean example was probably 30 years. You were right. It's probably a long-term plan. And people say we can't manufacture things in Australia because our wages are too high. Look at the car and the automobile industry. Hang on a minute. Look at Sweden. 8 million people. They've got a very viable Volvo, Saab. They've got the defence.
Yes, you're right.
They're manufacturing planes.
You were right, Dave. But there'll be some things that you want to build anyway, and it doesn't matter what it costs.
100%.
And so that's what that.
And that was the point of this post UK by-election podcast was that in order to win over the South, the how did they describe them? The more leafy parts of England was it's a national sovereignty, it's a national security issue, and they are the things where it doesn't quite matter how much they cost. We're going to have to do them.
Yes, absolutely. And where's that discussion in Australia?
We don't have one.
Exactly.
I've only got time for one last question. We are running a little bit over. It's the same question I ask everybody, so you'll both get the opportunity to answer it. What's the one thing we're not talking about that we should be?
What we're discussing today, as a nation, we should be having this discussion at our dinner tables. We should be talking about where the country should be heading. What sort of a future does Australia want? Do we want to be the banana republic that Paul Keating famously predicted, or do we want to be a nation that is proud of what it can do? I mean, we're capable of a lot of amazing things in Australia. I mean, even today, in spite of some of the things we've talked about today, we're still doing amazing things. But we need to have this national discussion about, what sort of a nation do we want to be in future, and to what extent do we want to be self-reliant? What should the future look like? Do we just want to be a nation of service providers, like education, banking and finance, or do we want to actually add value in the value chain?
I heard someone describe that potential Australia as the Ibiza of Asia.
Well, and we talked about the considerable impact on the service industry that AI is going to have. So I think we need, as a nation, to have this discussion about where do we want to be in 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, just before you, it's funny, the past couple of podcasts that I've done around this subject have all essentially come back to one core question: is what sort of country do we want to be? It's very interesting that that's starting to filter more and more. And I know that I'm kind of in a bit of a sheltered cocoon within the areas that I operate in, but it's even some of my non-political mates are now starting to go, hang on a second, something's not right here. Sorry, Steve.
No, you're right. And I think anybody with a family, and you've got a young family, I've got children and grandchildren, ought to turn their mind, and I suspect do, about keeping Australia safe and keeping our families safe. And that drives the next question, well, what does the national security strategy look like? And once again, I'm not talking about defence, I'm talking left of arc defence and border security to right of arc, social cohesion in the middle, technology and energy, etc. So what do we need to do to invest to make sure that we have a robust capability in this country where we need it? And so back to the audit, back to the investment, back to sustaining that investment.
But the importance of that, Steve, is that will determine what sort of Australia we have, in part, won't it? So once we implement the plan that emerges from an audit, that's going to have a profound impact on the sort of Australia that we will have in 20 years.
Well, we're in a real malaise in terms of, industrial sort of output at the moment. So there's a big opportunity here to grow that industrial base.
We should view it as that. We should view it as an opportunity and stop, beating ourselves up that are we ever going to manufacture another car in Australia? Probably not. Who cares?
It's not
may
about
not need
cars.
to.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, Dave, thank you very much for your time today. If people want to stay up to date with the latest that you're both doing, where can they find more information? Have you got social media? I know you do.
Yes, I've got my own website, but I've also on LinkedIn. So if anybody would like to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'd love to hear from you.
Steve?
I don't have a social media footprint. However,
Probably smart,
but you can reach out to me through LinkedIn.
Excellent. And for people who want to stay up to date with the latest in defence industry and the national security conversation, head over to defenceconnect.com.au, or you can find us wherever you get your social media bar TikTok. Until next time, bye-bye.